If you've been exhausting yourself trying to earn approval from people who probably aren't even thinking about you, this episode breaks down the psychology of why we place our worth in others' hands and how understanding these three key concepts can help you reclaim your internal compass. Okay, hey, this is Francisca, and this is My Crisis Life, and today is Monday Mindset. So today on Monday Mindset, we're going to talk about three specific things because I touched on them yesterday in Crisis Confessionals, but I want to talk a little bit more about them, maybe explain them a little bit more clearly. So today we're going to talk about locus of evaluation, we're going to talk about conditional positive regard, and we're going to talk about internal working models and how all three of these things kind of combine together to give us an understanding of who we are and give us kind of an operating system, I guess, in the world. So your locus of evaluation, this idea comes from Carl Rogers and humanistic psychology, and it's basically talking about where your sense of value comes from, and it determines kind of what and who has influence, what or who determines our sense of worth, our sense of success, our ability to succeed, and kind of our decision making, how we make our decisions, right? So there's two main types. There's an internal locus of evaluation and an external locus of evaluation. So an internal locus of evaluation is about us as individuals deciding our own value base. So deciding that based on our experiences, based on our needs, and based on our beliefs. An external locus of evaluation is where you rely on other people's approval, other people's standards that you're trying to meet, or other people's judgments to be able to define your worth, your value in the world, right? So the idea is that the more that you internalize your locus, the more you internalize your locus of evaluation, the more authentic your life choices are, because they're not based on people pleasing, on being good, on being accepted, on someone else's standards, on someone else's judgment. You're not defining your worth on how someone else sees you. An external locus of evaluation can lead to, as I say, like people pleasing, and through that kind of like burnout, people pleasing, burnout through kind of giving and trying to be good and trying to be the best, and a really kind of shaky sense of identity, an identity that's not stabilized, that doesn't have a strong foundation, and can kind of move depending on whose validation you're looking for at any one given time, right? So an example would be an internal locus of evaluation would be something like, I feel proud because I know that I did my best. And that comes from inside of you. An external locus evaluation is more like saying, I feel proud because my boss said that I did well, because my mom says that I'm a good person, because my friends want to invite me out, right? And the thing that's really ironic about it is that when you place your locus of evaluation, when you place your value and your self-worth in somebody else's hands, you don't really know actually what their opinion of you is. You don't know if your boss is saying that you did well because he has a need to please also. Maybe you did a really shit job, right? Who knows? You don't know if your friends are inviting you out because you're a good person, or maybe they're just lonely and they just want someone around them. You don't know whether or not your parent really does think that you're a good person. Maybe they're just mollycoddling you, right? So it's just ironic that there's this whole value base that's placed outside of ourselves when actually no one really cares that much. Like, you're not the main character in anybody else's life. And they're all doing things that are based on their own way of evaluating themselves, right? It's insane. So core conditional positive regard. So again, this is also like a Carl Rogers thing, and it deals with how we receive love and acceptance from other people around us. So the idea is that when acceptance or love is given only if you meet certain conditions or expectations, then that affects how we then receive love, how we see love, and how we accept love and accept ourselves, right? And the opposite of this is an unconditional positive regard, means that you're valued just for existing, not because of anything that you do within that existence, right? So conditional positive regard, what it does is it teaches people that they're only worthy if they can perform or behave in a certain way, right? And what that often does is it creates this ideal self versus real self gap. So this idea that the real us is not as good or good enough to be accepted, and that this ideal self, if we could just reach this version of ourselves, then that would mean that we could get the positive regard that we need. It would mean that we would get the acceptance and the love that we desperately need, that we all need as individuals, right? And what that can lead to is it can just lead to real high levels of anxiety, constantly trying to perform. It can lead to really low self-esteem when we feel like we haven't met those conditions, and it can lead to real massive issues around imposter syndrome, never feeling good enough, never feeling like anything that you do is good enough, feeling that you're not okay in your own skin, feeling like you're constantly pretending to be something that you're not good enough to be, because essentially you are, right? Because you're trying to be this ideal self that you can never really actually reach, right? Unconditional positive regard actually just fosters a level of self-acceptance, and through that creates a level of emotional security, so that we can go out into the world and we can feel like no matter what we do, whether we achieve it or not, we still have value as a person, right? So it's kind of the difference between somebody saying, I love you if you get straight A's, and someone saying to you, well, actually, I love you whether you fail or succeed, because you know what, you're more than your grades. Yeah. I love you as a person. I love you for just existing, because you're deserving of love. And I think a lot about like religion when I talk about this sort of stuff, and how the most gods, I mean, I don't know, I'm not going to talk about other people's religions, but definitely the religion that I grew up in, which was Catholicism, that is a God that is judgmental. That is a God that gives you conditional positive regard. If you follow these rules, if you do good, if you're moralistic in this way, if you're, I don't know, legalistic in the way that you live your life, in the way that you follow the Bible, then it means that you'll get enough love and you'll get acceptance. It means that you'll go to heaven. It means that you're a good enough person. And it's just this way of kind of persecuting ourselves. It's this way of like having to play a game that we're never really going to win, right? But actually, there's a story in the Bible that Jesus tells where he talks about the farmer, and the farmer has all of these farm hands, and some of them turn up and do the work 9 to 5, some of them work extra time, some of them do half time, some of them just turn up and kind of like scratch their ass and pick their noses, and then at the end of the week, everybody gets given the same amount of money, and people are just pissed. They're like, wait, why is everybody getting the same amount as me, irrespective of what they do? But it's kind of like that idea that God gives us grace. It doesn't matter. We don't have to push to be a certain person. We don't have to push to achieve certain goals. And then we'll be acceptable. We're acceptable just because we exist, right? And actually, ironically, it's when you get that level of unconditional positive regard, that unconditional love, that people say, well, actually, I want to give more in that case. You know, not everybody, but the majority of people, because we are innately compassionate, we're innately loving, and we're innately grateful, irrespective of what this system that we live in right now tells us that we are. When someone says, you know what, I'm going to give to you just because you are, and I value you just because you are, people often say, well, you know what, I want to give back then in that case. And it's not about proving your worth, right? So essentially, the reason why conditional positive regard or positive regard, whether it be conditional or unconditional, and where our locus of evaluation comes from, the connection between those two is that when we grow up with conditional positive regard, we develop an external locus of evaluation. We look outside of ourselves for approval, right? And healing in this sense involves unconditional acceptance, firstly to ourselves, learning to love ourselves unconditionally. And that allows us to shift our locus of evaluation from external to the internal. And we start to trust our inner compass. We start to listen more to our intuition rather than who it is that we feel we should be. The other thing I wanted to talk about was this idea of internal working models. So this is a theory that was put forth by John Bowlby, who is a big player in kind of like child development. What internal working models are is essentially they're like blueprints that we form in really early life. So we form these blueprints about ourselves. Am I lovable? Am I worthy of care? Am I good enough? Should I survive? Should I be here on the earth? We form these blueprints about other people. Can I trust other people to meet my needs? Can I trust them to give to me when I'm in need? And we create these blueprints about the world. Is the world safe or is it a threatening place, right? And essentially these internal working models, again, are shaped by how we're responded to by our caregivers around us. So, for example, if as a child we got consistent, unconditional positive regard, then we're going to form an internal working model that says, I'm worthy of love. You know, I cry and I get fed. I cry and I get held. I cry and I get changed because I'm worthy of that. The people around me deem me to be worthy enough to care about me, right? And others can be trusted. But if the care that we're given is conditional, if it's neglectful, if it's unpredictable, then the model becomes, I'm only valuable if I perform, or people let me down and I can't rely on people, right? Internal working models are like emotional operating systems. They're very unconscious, but they guide everything. They guide how we are in relationships. They guide our level of self-worth. They guide our emotional regulation. They guide how we interact and perceive the world, essentially. They shape our attachment styles, whether or not we have a secure attachment, an avoidance attachment, an ambivalent attachment, or a disorganized attachment. And they directly influence our locus of evaluation. So if we grow up secure in our internal working models, then we have a really strong internal focus. But if your internal working models are insecure, then you're most likely to rely on external validation, on people to validate you. But the good thing is that all of these things are really malleable. All of them can be changed. All of them can be reconditioned. All of them can be relearned, right? So therapy, of course, is a really good place to do that. But even if you don't want to go to therapy, there's ways that you can do it through self-reflection. There's ways that you can do it through somatic practice. There's ways that you can do it through new emotional experiences, and they all can be really rewritten, right? And I think for me, that's kind of like what my focus is, what my drive is, what my purpose is, to help people to kind of reprogram these internal working models, reprogram where they place their value, whether it's external or internal, and reprogram their ability to accept and love themselves unconditionally. So if that's something that hits home, if that's something that you're interested in doing, come back on Thursday. We're going to do a Chrysalis Tools practice that's going to help to identify and maybe shift some of these internalized thoughts and feelings. Okay, that's it. That external validation you've been chasing is based on assumptions about what others think, and you'll never actually know their real opinions anyway. Drop a comment about which concept hit home for you or what internal working model you're ready to reprogram. Thursday's Chrysalis Tools will give you a practice to identify and shift these unconscious patterns.